There we go.
The opening quote that I have, which is coming from the Afterword in the Upanishads, entitled "A Religion for Modern Times." The quote I have is from the Maitri Upanishad, which states, ready, one becomes like that which is in one's mind. This is the everlasting secret. This was
So true.
right toward the end of the afterword.
Mm-hmm.
One becomes like that which is in one's mind.
One becomes like that which is in one's mind. Yeah, yeah.
And many other amazing lines from the
Oh my
afterword.
goodness, the afterword was filled with so many good things. I underlined and
Yeah,
starred
the
a lot of sections.
oh god, same, same. We should say it's by a professor of classics and comparative literature by the name of Michael Nagler.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote this in the conclusion of our text on the Upanishads. Do you want to do you want to start with something?
Um, I Good question.
I was actually going to jump right to the middle.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
There was a part that really like you know I mean when you read there's the phenomena of okay, I get this, I understand this, especially with the Upanishads, where the afterword does reiterate a lot of the themes that we've seen. And I think we said this in the previous conversations and videos that we were hearing just these repeated themes. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, here we are again, still the mind, control the senses, you know. I mean, and not to be, glossed over those, that's a Herculean feat to be able to do. But so sometimes when I'm reading, I'm like, yep, I got this. The Upanishads reiterated this. Yeah, I get it all. But the one section, and this is the phenomenon of reading that really grabbed me, where I was going from sort of this um, casual reader to intensified, was oh gosh, there are two in particular, but let me just get it was in the philosophy section.
Philosophy section was really good,
Yeah.
really deep.
And it was, let me see, it was that one, but it was the thought experiment. Let's see. Sorry, I'm like going on about like the profundity, and now I'm losing the spot. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, I think there are a few. Um, this is on page 321.
Okay.
And it's toward the bottom. And I thought this was, I mean, he's making a claim earlier that, and I think this is important. And one of the things I find very attractive about the Upanishads is the connection between, as he says on 321, middle of, the connection between metaphysics and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So your understanding of ultimate reality and your understand and morality ought to be connected. And I do think it's interesting that at least when I taught philosophy, these sub disciplines in philosophy, so metaphysics, ethics, logic, political philosophy, epistemology, so on and so forth, could be seen as sort of distinct and not necessarily. This is not always true, but not necessarily converging on the other. So I'm really drawn to the idea, and that makes sense because this whole thing is like the whole Upanishadic view is unified. So it makes sense that the two would be unified. But
Mm-hmm.
it's the last part, it's starting at the bottom, it says, of the critical secrets of the Upanishads is that renunciation is the opposite of deprivation. When the senses are untrained, they run wild, leading to a state of conditioning that is the opposite of freedom. Joy comes from putting these faculties back on track under the guidance of the self. This is precisely why the Upanishads teach renunciation. not only are joy and renunciation not contradictory, they positively require each other. This goes back to, I guess you could sort of do a thumbnail summary of this with Gandhi's statement about summarizing the Upanishads, right? Renounce and enjoy.
Yeah.
Um, but what I thought was really interesting there is that it does a reversal on um, what people normally think about, the feeling they normally get when they think about renunciation. It's a chore.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard work. I'm giving up something. It's going to be a struggle to do that. Why would I want to give that up? It tastes good. It looks good, and now I've got to suffer,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what's really interesting there is that, you know, the well, I mean, to go back to the line, joy comes from putting these faculties back on track under the guidance of the self. So what's really interesting there is that you're you're actually suffering. I'm sorry, you have real suffering is actually being the slave to the passions. That's actually real suffering. And we think being, well, we wouldn't call it a slave to the passions, but uh, pursuing pleasures. We think that pursuing pleasures is ultimate is the joy.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the joy is. And so this really interesting reversal of like actually no, you know, the renunciation brings about this joy, and this joy is far more permanent than the temporary passing, and not even joy, fulfillment of the desire. So I really liked the sort of the logic at play there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it's I'm sorry, is renunciation hard? Yes, it is hard, but the gain after a prolonged period of renunciation far outweighs the the fleeting pleasure that
Mm-hmm.
you end up just needing to repeat anyway, right? It's like an addiction,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it's like truly free when
Yeah,
you
yeah,
renunciate. Um, the joy comes from not being stuck with anything or drawn to
yeah,
anything. So,
precisely,
yeah.
precisely. That was like, I mean, even continuing on 322 in the Bhagavad Gita, desire is referred to one as the rasa of of objects. Skipping a line, since a thing's essence is more permanent. I love this. Since a thing's essence is more permanent than its material embodiment, it stands to reason that if we could somehow enjoy that essence directly, our enjoyment would be permanent, or would be more permanent than sensory contact with the thing itself. So the
Mm-hmm.
like it's almost like we have this um, flawed, or let's say the natural position, right, is a is sort of this flawed orientation to the thing that we think is giving us pleasure and joy or happiness. Um, but really, what we're after is something else. It's I remember I think I shared this before, not in these lectures or in these sorry videos, but I remember when I was teaching at George Washington University, I was walking by someone's classroom and the lecture sounded interesting, so I just stood there, and it was like it was I think it was a philosophy class, but I think he was lecturing on Augustine, and he's like the purpose of ice cream is not to cure depression. That has never been the purpose of ice cream, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and so it's this orientation toward the you've got a problem, and then you're seeking this particular solution that really is not meant to solve that problem, right? Right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
something else going on, that requires sort of deeper intervention than a bowl of ice cream, you know.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Yeah, I talking about this reminded me of a quote. I have a thing on my phone. It's like a
mhm,
Stoic app, and it
yeah,
just has quotes. So every day there'll be a new
yeah,
random quote.
like a quote of the day thing, or
Yeah. So
yeah,
from different Stoic people, but also like quotes from movies and stuff that appear. like Stoic.
Yeah.
But one of them was, it was like sometimes your smile comes from your joy, and other times your joy is like produced by your smile. And it was interesting. It's
Yes.
like the
Yeah.
it's not something that you just get from eating ice cream or the
Yeah.
pleasurable senses, but it's like something beyond that that you can just feel, and it's like you can
Yeah.
see the evidence of it in the way that you're smiling, which you can also have
Yeah.
from pleasure, but you can
Yeah.
feed joy without having the pleasurable senses, which is like it's interesting.
Totally.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. No, no, exactly. Like um, yeah, you like whatever the latter of that quote is tapping into something that's internal,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
I am now going to make myself smile for no reason, for no external cause,
Hmm.
from no external cause, and and now I'm happy, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
Um, I really do think that it is a really interesting wisdom tradition in the sense of a deep dive um, on one's consciousness, on the inside of one,
Hmm.
and what one does with that, you know. Um, so which is vastly interesting, you know. Um, and also too, as the text brings up, which we saw and we talked about before, but he brings up in the afterword. This is not something that's a divine revelation necessarily. This is not something that is a Bible that's come down from the sky that you just have to believe. This is testable.
Hmm.
You know, go out and try this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Use your own direct observation to see if you can confirm it. You
Yep,
know,
I think at the beginning it says what the Upanishads are scientific and experiential. They don't say believe this, they
hmm
say we have seen, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can confirm it for yourself. Our
yeah,
outlook is non-judgmental. I'm on 296. They
hmm
speak with fervor about darkness and ignorance, not with indignation about sin.
yeah,
Ignorance is its own punishment, wisdom is its own reward. Just kind of picking different
hmm
verses here.
hmm
Or
yeah. No, no,
yeah.
I see. I've underlined like a lot of that as well.
Yeah. And so it's
Um,
like I don't know. I also so I did, a study on like the Stoic philosophy a couple years ago. It was like a book club, and it's like
cool.
this paragraph. It feels like it's word for word the same thing that was talked about
Oh,
with Stoicism
interesting.
because it is really a philosophy. It's something that you can test for yourself. It's not like a
Yeah,
religion that is like shoved down your throat or told
yeah,
that like this is the way that has to be. And it's like, well,
yeah.
maybe I don't know. We'll see with the Vedas, but like the Upanishads for sure are the philosophy, and are
Well, it's
experiential.
interesting. It's interesting how to like how do you like, in terms of those religions you were referencing.
Hmm.
You have in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, you have divine revelation. Now, granted, I don't think you don't have that with Taoism. You don't have that with Confucianism,
Hmm.
as we'll see. I don't know about like Shinto and and some of the uh, smaller, you know, religions, not small in importance, maybe size. And I don't think you really have that with you don't have it with Buddhism.
Hmm.
So in other words, all of those. Like, granted, we'll see when we get to the Vedas. Um, you know, we'll see like how much of sort of divine revelation there is, right?
Right.
The sort of thing that you really can't confirm is what I'm
Hmm.
getting at,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Some message comes from um, it comes from an eternal source that's written down and then needs to be believed,
Hmm.
that so you really have that with, I think, primarily with the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, right? A Bible of some sort that
Right.
was authored by God. But what is interesting is, um, you know, so yeah, there is that. Where is that direct? I mean, unless you're a mystic within those traditions,
Right. Hmm.
or within the Catholic tradition, well, usually they are mystics, but a saint that has had a vision, right?
Hmm.
But that's going to be their, right. It's not going to be our. Um, we won't have experienced that. Someone else will have.
Yeah.
But it's that I guess that is one thing that's really appealing, I don't have to, um, within these traditions, I'm not required to believe things on the basis of faith, and then always having that question of, is this true? But is this true? Right?
Hmm.
Um, all the other ones seem um, experimental or experiential in the sense of like I sit, I meditate. That's going to be true for um, Hinduism and Buddhism, Taoism, and nature, right? And nature's the guide fundamentally,
Hmm.
um, you know, and but I do wonder, especially with interreligious dialogue, and maybe maybe the Spong book is maybe hitting at that in different ways. Of I don't want to say reimagining, so that we're sort of destroying what's true about Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, but to what degree are they Upanishadic, and we're
Hmm.
just not seeing it, you know?
Yeah. Hmm. Because
Um,
of how it's interpreted, maybe.
how it's interpreted, how it's interpreted, but by the traditions, uh, but like when you start to look, I mean, like I mean, I don't know, the image of God is one, right? Within that tradition, it's like I'm not just a thing,
Yeah.
I have some, I have whatever image of God means. I've got something. I either have something divine in me, or I have something that is like divine in me.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Um,
even with something like that, you can compare that to how, like, the Hindu looks at the body and the self, right? If the
yeah.
self is the ground of all being is Brahman, right? Then
Hmm.
that's like the image of God, right? That's very like that's the
Yeah.
same idea, just a different presentation.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And then, but again, then you have the layer of interpretation that comes within the Christian tradition that
Hmm.
separates creator from creation. So now you have
I
separation,
think you still
which
have that
then,
in the Upanishads because it's like we aren't like we are the self, but we are not completely the self. Like there's something that keeps us away from it,
yeah,
right? Like you have to be able to access
yeah,
it. Hmm.
yeah. But I think when it comes down to it, yeah, I would say the creator distinction within the Judeo-Christian, and I'm assuming Islamic tradition, the non-mystical ones, um, that 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 divide is pretty certain
Hmm.
between God and the creatures,
Right.
right?
Like they don't
So in
think,
other words,
yeah.
I'm not gonna in heaven. I am not. I mean, according to the tradition, I'm not God.
Hmm.
I'm in the presence of God in the beatific vision.
Right.
You
Right.
know, whereas in this tradition, it certainly has this sense of like you know, Atman is Brahman,
Hmm.
right? Your true internal self is divine, as is the true internal self of everything we see around us.
Hmm.
Um, but it would be interesting. I think about it every now and then. I think there's even one passage in the New Testament. Um, and I think it's a Jesus saying where it's almost sounds like a flip saying. But I'll have to check it. I'll have to check it. But he's like, "You are gods,"
Hmm.
and it's like, whoa, and it's not one that's, you know, I don't think it's preached on a lot, you
Hmm.
so it just be sort of, and I think like even he's like we even read that there are like some later Upanishads on like Muhammad and Christ,
Hmm.
um, so it makes me sort of wonder like could you give a fair Upanishadic interpretation of those three major world religions? You know.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Oh, so what else hit you?
Let's see. Oh, I mean, this was smaller, but in the Songs of Truth section, right after the part we were just talking about,
Hmm.
um, this idea of decentralized authority and unwritten stability
Mm,
was very
hmm. I see.
interesting. Um,
What
because it's
page is
like
that?
297. I only underlined the one part, but the whole paragraph, that whole
Yeah.
first paragraph is very
Hmm.
interesting. Um, where does it start? Let's see. Yeah, to be Hindu means in some sense to accept their authority, since Hinduism is a
Hmm.
decentralized system with diffuse institutional controls. There's almost no
Yeah.
other criterion. As
Yeah.
one studies the Upanishads today, it is useful to keep in this view this seeming paradox of decentralized authority and unwritten stability. I think it continues on
Yeah.
somewhere else where it was kind of comparing that to like what is needed in the world. I'm trying to think.
Later on with the
Yeah.
when he starts to address politics.
Yes. Where is that? Is that
Yeah.
at the end
That
or?
was like the pretty. It was very much close to the end. Yeah.
Okay.
He starts to bring up. It might be curve of history. Um,
The curve of history was very, yeah, yeah.
let's see. That was.
Oh, the curve of history is pretty short actually. It might
Oh,
have
maybe
it
not then. Maybe
might have been
not.
in the
Maybe it was
philosophy.
the
Is
end
it
of.
this?
Oh, maybe it was the end of the philosophy one. Yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, I even like dog-eared the page. Hold on.
Oh, here it is. Yep, here it is. 327. Yeah, I have the most marks on
Okay.
this page. Um,
Nice.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, this whole paragraph is just gold. Um, While various thinkers today have remarked how modern physics seems to reflect the vision of the forest sages, few have noticed how another significant discovery of ours was long anticipated by them: the concept of unity in diversity. Originally popularized by Hegel, this mildly paradoxical theme is becoming central in discussions of how a nation or even the world should be organized. For a very simple reason, the world needs, as Richard Falk has put it, quote, "the maximum degree of spontaneous solidarity," end quote. But what kind of
Hmm.
solidarity? A mega government? If this is to be a world order, one may be excused for preferring chaos. Which it just that like those two lines there, it's like mega government
Yeah.
and preferring chaos just makes me think of like so many like fiction, like things like Star Wars and
Oh,
like just a bunch
totally.
of scenarios, and
Totally.
also like other things that have played out in actual history. And then we get to this section here. When he begins to specify the requirements for true solidarity, Professor Falk sounds almost Upanishadic. The goal must
Yeah,
be,
I have
quote,
this underlined too.
the maintenance of living systems at all levels of complexity. The exploration of space and the planetary character of economic, ecological, and cybernetic complexity are building the foundations of an inevitable global consciousness. End quote. We want a new principle of political order which does not depend upon or induce uniformity among peoples, but which, tolerant of complexity, promotes the fullest unfolding of their individual potential, which happens to be a definition of nonviolence.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
just that
No,
hit me.
that's
I read that over and over again because like there's so much there,
yeah.
and I feel like it's
Hmm.
very applicable to modern era, like governments and how things are happening, and even
Sure.
AI and other things like that. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that the especially that last line, which happens to be a definition of nonviolence.
Hmm.
Obviously, the earlier pages were developing this notion of
Hmm.
nonviolence. Um, so it's interesting to see how nonviolence. I mean, obviously, the maintenance of living systems makes sense, right? That in other words, you're maintaining them, so you'd be violating the rule of nonviolence
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
by not maintaining them, right? Um, Same thing with ecology. Um, and then, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, the exploration of space and planetary character of economic, ecological, and cybernetic complexity. Oh yeah, that's more saying like what we've discovered, right, and what we're developing
Hmm.
um, are building foundations of an inevitable global consciousness. It's sort of curious, like how that plays out,
What do you mean?
like, well, I, I guess one, what would be meant by global consciousness? So that's just basic definition.
Hmm.
Two, once we've defined that, um, how how does a global conscious how do the individuals within that global consciousness, let's say, I guess, sort of like interact, um, communicate, such that the global consciousness is, sorry, the particulars of the global consciousness are working in sync with each other,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I can sort of, like, if you want to go with a small example,
Hmm.
like, oh wow, tut tut, looks like rain. Huh,
Oh,
we'll just let it ride.
rain in California? I
It's light. Yeah, I know. It's light right now.
think we're supposed to have rain
Um,
all week next week.
yeah. No,
A simple example.
the rain made, yeah, a simple saying, thank you. A simple example would be, you and me and our reading over the years and setting up time to talk
Hmm.
and to have our book talks. That would be one consciousness with another consciousness working in tandem, respecting the other person's, like when we were reading, you chose a book, other books, right? We were
Hmm.
not doing a theme.
Yeah.
You reading a book, and then you choosing a book, I being open to read it, even if it wasn't a favorite genre, and vice versa.
Hmm.
So that, like, I can look at that as sort of like a really micro example of two consciousnesses, it being in sync,
Hmm.
and even like being flexible, like, can we miss this call this week, or can we change this date, or even when I wanted to gut the whole world religions tour, even though we were on it, and you were like, you proposed, well, actually, I would really like to do that, and then I was like, okay, you're right, that's
Hmm.
two consciousnesses working in tandem. um, Now I think about my family. Now that's five consciousnesses, not necessarily working in sync, right? At times,
Or
yes.
non-violence. No.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, right, right. Precisely, precisely. So I guess I'm thinking of, like, as you go to a grander scale with that, and you get more macro, like, how does that work, right? You know,
Hmm.
um, that and I guess I guess you can look at, I don't know, there are always, I mean, there are outliers because we're not there, right? North Korea, to a degree, China, but that's a big chunk of the global consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Some would say Trump America, so on and so forth, right? That would be
Hmm.
sort of like, but it seems like when you have a lot of countries working in concert with each other, then you're getting on, I don't know, let's say various, like, environmental ends, reducing emissions as an example, right?
Sure.
Then you see sort of glimpses of what that would look like, you know,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm. Of what the
or
global consciousness would look like. That's the what you're trying to get at.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and also, like, how it would work. Like, I'm looking at us as a small example and being like, yeah, it's smooth, right? And there's a
Hmm.
history, and there's a family relationship, and there's work that we put into the relationship too, right?
Hmm.
But, like, yeah, what would that look like at sort of a global level? Um, and maybe it's hard to imagine right now because there is so much divisiveness in the world, right?
Yeah.
And ego as well, massive ego. Putin wanting to take over Ukraine for no good reason, right?
Hmm.
Um, you know, and then, so yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what it would look like. I'm just curious, like, what's okay? I know what it would look like. It basically be peace, right, and everyone getting along. But I'm curious, like, how do you get from here to there? You know,
Yeah. No, it's a really good
the
question.
massive question.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know. Part of this paragraph, I mean, it talks about the mega government, right? Which is like maybe
Yeah,
you have a global government that kind of is residing over everything, right? And some people are
yeah,
all for a world government, um, because it's like
right.
it sounds like unity, right? Unifying everything under one. But then you
Yeah,
also have the
yeah,
issue of what comes with a mega government or government, which is you have
yeah,
one or a few elite people, running that government, or you have a
Yeah.
democracy where
Yeah.
you still have
Yeah.
problems
And
with rule of the many, of the masses. And
true.
so it's like in that in the scenario where you have government, you're having like rule from above, or you have rule from the majority, which
Mm-hmm.
you end up with problems like ego, taking over kind
Yeah.
of like what you're doing. And then this provides the alternative. Well, I guess there's three things that they talk about here. They talk about mega government,
Yeah.
they talk about chaos, which is apparently, in their
Right.
opinion, better than mega government. And chaos
Then mega government.
reminds me of talking of John Locke and was it it was yeah John
Oh,
just
oh,
John
Thomas
Locke
Hobbes.
and
Was it
Thomas
Thomas
Hobbes.
Hobbes?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Reminds me of talk of when we talked about them.
Nasty, nasty British and short.
Yeah.
That's the word. Yeah.
Where the world was just unorganized. It was chaos,
Yes.
right? And like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
kind of a fear that comes with that of like you need to fend
Yeah.
for yourself. But there's like also a freedom because you're
Yeah.
free to do whatever. Just you need to
Right.
take care of
Right.
yourself and
Right.
fend for
Right.
yourself.
Yeah. You're talking about sort of like man in a natural state, a
Yes.
so-called natural state. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Before you have any sort of politics or government or
Hmm.
what is it? Contract, social
Right.
contract.
Yeah.
Um,
You're yeah. You're living in fear, and so you trade off the living of fear to the Leviathan, who then ends up controlling everything. So you
yeah.
give away your freedom in order to solve the problem of uh, mortal fear.
Yeah.
You
hmm
know.
Which in this quote, Richard Falk, yeah, it says that he prefer chaos than mega government.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we have the third kind of aspect of what's it, unity and diversity, right? Like how you would achieve this, and that
Yeah.
is the this idea of what's the word? Okay, well no, yeah, spontaneous solidarity,
Yeah.
um,
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
which
Which would be in
concludes
our
to
case, would be
nonviolence, right?
which yeah, but ours would be what we're doing here with our book talks. That's spontaneous solidarity. There's no one coercing it from outside.
Yeah,
there's no leader that's saying you two need to have a book talk every other week.
right.
So it's spontaneous solidarity in that. And
hmm
that is what I'm wondering. Like
But the family
I
example
wonder.
might not be,
Mhm.
right? Because you have kind of a hierarchy of like parents
You
and
do it, yeah.
children.
You have a hierarchy, and I would argue that if you don't have that, then you have chaos,
Yeah,
right?
probably,
In other
especially
words,
up until a certain
like
age.
yeah, up until a certain age, so you
hmm
need to like the kid can't just do what they want to do, right?
hmm
But you know, I don't know. There's see, the Gandhi example is really interesting because Gandhi as an individual and only as let's just put it this way, like a notable saint or sage without political clout
hmm
ends up ends up kicking Britain out of India. Okay,
Yeah.
um, so what you have there is, I mean, and obviously there were there were other sort of like things going on, but in terms of like causes,
Yeah.
but the but what it makes me wonder is to go back to the earlier quote that we opened with about we are sort of we are what we think we are what we have in our mind
hmm
is that is it the case that Gandhi was actually able to muster up that kind of non-political power but power literally through sort of a Upanishadic process of self-realization.
hmm
So in other words, like the more we purify ourselves, I guess this is the model I have. The more that everyone, if that were to happen, is purifying themselves according to these principles, gaining control of the senses,
hmm
forms of renunciation, forms of meditation, all of that. That if it were the case that that sort of spreads globally,
hmm
right? Therein you have spontaneous solidarity, right?
Yeah.
You don't have, you know, you don't. And by the way, I guess we're talking more about adults, so we're not talking about like the family. The family's going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
have some hierarchy, right? But we're more talking about sort of adults that are running the world. That if is that the image? Is the
Hmm.
image like work on yourself, you're self-realized, next person, self-realized, and then it just continues to spread. And in that, you don't have to have some type of central authority figure, beating us with a stick
Yeah.
and saying do the right thing, but that we're transforming ourselves and ergo transforming the global consciousness.
I
Yeah.
think so. I think that makes a lot of
I mean,
sense.
if
I think
for
the
most political realists, it's a pipe dream, right? Like
well,
you're
yeah, no,
just,
no. I think it is.
or you're smoking the pipe, you know?
I think it is, but I think if it were achievable, that's how it would play out. But the
Yeah,
problem is a lot of people don't know like I don't know, there's a lot of things, but like people don't want to put in the work
yeah,
to
yeah.
like be more
Oh
self-conscious
gosh,
and conscious of others, right? So that their ego
you
is
can,
taking over kind of like,
yeah.
and that's a big thing. You have to overcome your
Christian,
ego.
the list goes on,
I
man.
know. Yeah.
Abuse,
Hmm.
trauma. Oh, hand effects using. No, I don't want hand effects. I don't know what that is. Right, abuse, trauma, sort of the lure of the lure of all the attractiveness of popular culture, celebrity culture, the quest for money,
And
the
all
quest
kinds of
for
comes down to
power.
like elitism
I
or
mean,
ego, right? Like I feel like you can kind of simplify
it,
it. Like all of those are
yeah,
manifestations of that.
of ego.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but also I would at least say in the case of trauma and abuse, uh, it's almost sort of like you have a lot of work to do on that mind, right?
Hmm.
It's not their
Hmm.
fault,
Yeah,
as it
yeah.
were,
That's the
you know?
result of someone else's ego or
Right.
elitism or
Oh,
yeah.
I got
Hmm.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Actually, that's a good way of looking at it. No,
Hmm.
no, you're absolutely right. So the hurdles would be immense,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
but it's I don't know, but at the same time, then you can look at a number of examples in history where people are working together and we're dismantling nuclear arsenals and we're working on we're working to protect the environment or even just looking at something like a national park like it's some
Yeah.
people worked together to create this space that can't be used for commercial purposes and is used for pure joy and appreciation. So you can find sort of examples of that happening.
Their
You know,
pockets. Yeah.
although some of those were also done by fiat, like literally, like you know, Theodore Roosevelt was like, "That's now a national park. Don't
Right.
touch it." And we're now like, "Thank you, thank you."
Finally, it's like
But
well, it's like there's a lot of people who want those things, right, to be protected,
yeah,
like as a
yeah,
collective, but then I don't know, the individual, the collective can't do it. They end up needing somebody in a position of
right,
authority to do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then everyone catches on, right?
Hmm.
It's sort of like, oh yeah, this is a good thing. Oh wow, look at we want this preserved, protect this. Oh my goodness, and in
Yeah.
mass, we're all saying protect it.
Hmm.
So, but yeah,
I th
I do think it's at some level it's going to have to start with the individual giving a damn
yeah.
about themselves and what's in their head and what they're saying and what they're thinking and what they're doing, and then hopefully, as in the case of you and me, we are we are affecting each other, and we want to become more reflective and as hard as it is for me, want to become more selfless, you know,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then that spreads,
I think the trouble is, I think the end of the real issue is, right, you have a world of government hierarchy,
Hmm.
power, like ego, and that the hierarchy works and it feeds the hierarchy, which is unfortunate because you have
Hmm.
people at the bottom of the hierarchy. But everybody in the middle is kind of
Yeah,
okay, and people at the top are thriving.
yeah,
Um, but you're trying to go from that system to one where it feels a lot more flat, right?
yeah,
The
yeah, yeah,
because I don't know, you're like the hierarchy, it's like you can get on edge, you can like get some sort of mechanical advantage or social
Yeah.
advantage or whatever, and you feel safe, right? You have the
Yeah.
social contract to keep you grounded. But then to go to this world of spontaneous solidarity, like how do you transition? I feel like you can't just be
Yeah.
somebody and be like, "Oh, I'm going to be nonviolent," because
Yeah. Yeah.
there's like a fear of being targeted by the hierarchy
Hmm.
or the ego or the
Yeah.
whatever, the elite. And
Sure.
it's like going from this state to this state is difficult. And it's like almost the
Yeah.
same fear, I feel like, as going into the world of chaos. Because
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
world of chaos, of natural chaos, you're
Mhm.
afraid of the natural environments and threats. But
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
when you're almost trying to come out of the society, right, out of the social
Mhm.
contract, the things that create the hierarchy and the ego, you're trying to come out of
Yeah.
that, and by coming out of that, that can kind of become the enemy or the nature
Yeah.
or the fear. And so
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
and then also, I don't know, just thinking about things like with Gandhi, and it's like nonviolence, if that is your primary like mode of operation, like that is scary. like
Yeah.
like especially
Yeah.
if there are threatening people, and many of them lived through it and they died.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
that's scary, but it ended up working
Yeah.
for the group. And so it's like in order to have
Yeah.
this kind of nonviolent, spontaneous solidarity approach to life, you kind of need to sacrifice,
Yeah.
renunciate your own
Yeah.
life, right, for the
Yeah.
collective.
Yeah.
And so it's not
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm doing it because it's the right thing for me. It's like, I'm doing
Mhm.
it for us. And it's like, I might not be here because of it, but it's in the hope of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
future getting there. So it's like, I
Yeah.
don't know, part of that's like really touching and wholesome, but also it's like very scary because you have to
Yeah.
give it up. And
Sure.
giving stuff up is hard, especially when you're in a secure
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. No, no, no. I think you're right. The I mean, my own sense too is like, I mean, you've got like, my other thought was like, you've got, like you have all countries have borders. All countries have military to protect the borders. All countries have some type of intelligence that is looking into other countries that might want to harm them or
Hmm.
invade them. And that's, so I mean, that's a lot of that's a lot of mental power that's literally looked in. I mean, that's like what, there's deception involved. I've got to get, I've got to get intel. I've got to report it back. I mean, I mean, when you look at the sort of the macro, it's basically like a bunch of nervous individuals
Yeah.
with weapons protecting
And
themselves.
secrets, right?
So,
Weapons and
and
secrets.
secrets, yeah, so that the population within that country ultimately can exist
Yeah.
and go to work and have families and live some type of in our case, like an American dream.
Hmm.
But when you look at the image of it, it's unrest.
Hmm.
Like imagine. Let's put it this way: imagine a CAI agent or a KGB agent that is self-realized.
Hmm.
You know, I don't know. I don't feel like there's peace in
I
that kind of
I feel
world.
like,
But it's
you end up with
necessary.
people like Bob Ross who were in the military and then they left
Yes.
and went to do
Yes.
art.
I didn't know he was in the military.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Uh, I don't remember
Well,
exactly
let
what
me
he
share.
did, but yeah. I do
Yeah.
have one question for you, but go for it.
Oh, sure.
Okay, well, like just kind of
No,
on
no,
this
no, no,
topic.
no. I'm a little off. Then you go.
Okay.
I'm a little off.
Yeah. Because talking about this is reminding me of Plato and Aristotle. Um, and Socrates. And so it's like I'm wondering from what we read on like that ideal government that they were
Sure.
philosophizing,
Hmm.
which had armies and things to protect. Like I don't know,
Yep.
what do you see in like looking at that kind of ideal that they had, and then also looking at this kind of like nonviolence and like how does it connect? Or do we have to live in a world where we have to protect ourselves from some threat?
Yeah.
Or does there
I
have to
think.
be
Well, see,
some
I think.
backbone?
Yeah. I think. I think the. like the real political situation today is yes, we do.
Hmm.
Because if we don't have, I mean, and if we don't have if we don't have a strong military to protect our country, that anyone can just swipe right in
Hmm.
and take it. So even if there was just one bad apple, you know, one country. But if it was the case that the president of the United States says, guess what, we're going to be appealing to a new policy of nonviolence, and also nonviolence includes dismantling our military.
Hmm.
You could just imagine all the other all every country being like, wow, I'd like to have the United States then,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden we've got jets flying in and people parachuting, and then we're out of a country. So I like that's how I view sort of the world right now. I'm not saying it's just due to the fact that I mean, like Putin in Ukraine, it's I want to expand.
Hmm.
I want to take on more. I mean, I wonder whether or not he wants to get back to the original Soviet Union borders, which would include all the Eastern Bloc European countries, right?
Right.
It's just, so it's you just need that one country, and they're more than just that one country. Um, and then literally you're screwed if
Hmm.
if you start to if you're the dismantling. Um, so let's put it this way: everyone would need to be on the same page. If everyone's not on the same page, then guess what? Arms are up, borders are tight, and etc. I mean, it's funny. Every now and then, I'll be sitting in this courtyard, and I'll hear two. We live near a military airfield base,
Hmm.
not super near, but close. And every now and then, I hear like two jets go by, and they're like super high and massively loud. And I
Hmm.
think to myself, I'm like, we never have to worry about sort of a foreign attack of jets coming in. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And bombing our like it's we don't worry about it. We don't think because everyone knows that the United States has a massive military, and not only that, we've got radar going on all over the borders to make sure that there isn't anyone flying into our airspace. Um, and then we're able to be at peace. So everyone would have to be on the same page.
Yeah. You think that it's like it takes one
Like
ego to ruin a group of of
I think
self-realized?
so. I think
Wow.
so. Yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, at least in where we are now, if it could, if it is the case that global consciousness will continue to unify, then then we're at a point where like everyone's on the same page and thinking like, yeah, why would we want to be violent to anyone else? Why would we want to attack anyone else? They've got
Well,
their
what do
own
you
world there. They've got their own culture.
what do you think? I think I agree with a lot of that, right? It's like obviously you need to protect
Yeah,
against threats. But like what do you
yeah,
think about the idea of nonviolence with while maintaining weapons? Like while
yeah.
maintaining defense? And it's like I feel like everyone
No,
can kind of agree upon
yeah,
nonviolence as a strategy because nobody
hmm
wants to be hurt, right?
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like only when you have some bad actors they try to, but it's like, well, there's
Yeah.
consequences for your actions. But the
It
idea of
seems like that.
nonviolence with weapons.
No, I'm with you. I think that I think that's possible. I think what would happen would and by the way, um, obviously that's happening because not every country is engaged in a war right
Yeah.
now,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So so that means that it would have to be a um, either like a really important country like the United States, right? One that has a lot of visibility, or China, something, or Russia,
Hmm.
massive like visibility, or a number of countries that would be taking this stand of like nonviolence,
Hmm.
that are embracing that principle and saying, listen, we have our military only in case we get attacked, right?
Yeah.
However, we want to actually employ a policy of nonviolence, and that's what this looks like. And what that policy looks like is this whole list of traits,
Hmm.
and you know, but so. I think it's possible. I think Gandhi is the outlier because he's not coming from a particular. He's not in an institution. He's not in. I mean, he's not an institutional figure or a political figure, or even what we say a politically powerful figure, and yet he's able to kick the British armies off ultimately out of India. You
Hmm.
know, and all in a non-violent way. So but you have, like, and by the way, that's a powerful example, and actually would require like us to do a little bit more research to actually see what the mechanics were. Um, you know, but yeah, and I guess we have that in some, like we have that in some ways as a country. Like
Hmm.
I don't know, like something like a Bill of Rights,
Hmm.
like where you're already starting. It might not be all like in the spirit of nonviolence, but you have like sort of intimations of it where you're like, I'm going to protect individuals, right?
Yeah.
An
Yeah.
individual has rights. I want to protect them. I can't violate them. And so yeah, there's a sort of like inching along with some of those principles. Um, and then I often think too about the geopolitics as being so it's so it's like a matrix. So if because you're allies with one, if that ally gets attacked and you're not being directly attacked, then you feed them military resources, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's tricky, it's like um, I mean, maybe, we never got to just war theory, but just war theory is an interesting one about, actually using reason to justify when,
Hmm.
self-defense, you know,
Yeah.
um, not just personal self-defense, but the defense of, one's country. Um, so yeah, no,
Interesting.
it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think it's almost like the Christian evangelical um, approach of, you know what, I was saved, I see the light, now I want to share that with someone else, and hopefully I can convert them, and then there's a domino effect of conversions, as it were. That's
Hmm.
how I sort of see it, with some type of evangelical fervor to want to spread self-realization, you know, um, and even the author hints at that too, in terms of emerging at the time of his writing, of the East and the Western
Hmm.
minds.
Yeah.
I mean, even you and I now are reading a text that probably a lot of people wouldn't be reading 50 years ago in the United States, right?
Right.
We're weird anyway, but so sort of a blending. Or here's an interesting example. When we first moved to California, literally across our street was a Zen center,
Hmm.
where you could practice Zen Buddhism. And I've seen there are a lot, no surprise, in California, right, because of its position to Japan and
Sure.
the East. So that, and the whole '60s was about that too, right? Trying to find this Eastern wisdom in the West. So you could see there's a merging, um, and um, that if we play the global consciousness thing out, then the logic would be, you know, the wish and the practice for more and more merging of the two,
Right.
you
Hmm.
um, so let me share what
Yeah.
I had, if we because we were on the politics one for a bit. This one was really interesting. 323. I mean, it's all interconnected. So because we were even talking about the problem of ego in government.
Hmm.
Um, I really like this one. It's a second. Well, yeah, it's the second paragraph, because after the first paragraph break, the whole question is so important that I would. Well, I like that. Yeah, the whole question. Well, we don't know what the question is. That I would like to make another pass through this logic, as the Upanishads would, from a slightly different point of view. This is really interesting. If we could trace where a desire arises from, and the Upanishads do repeatedly, we would find that in most cases, something. A thought, an external event, has stirred up some wisp of the vague sense of incompleteness we harbor beneath the floor of surface consciousness as long as we are not identified with ourself. We immediately misinterpret this stirring as a desire for something outside us. This is Maya, misinterpreting the longing for union within as a call for something outside the self.
Hmm.
Um, the I like the idea of like tracing the desire, right?
Yeah.
I have this desire. What's its origin? I entirely agree with both. It's either inside or outside that stimulates it, right?
Mm-hmm.
A passing thought. Um, oh, totally an external event, right? I mean, that one's big, right? You're driving along, you see something, it's like, oh, I guess I could do that. The rain's really coming down now. It's actually sort of nice. Um, um, has stirred up some wisp of the vague sense of incompleteness. Love that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you don't want something. If you're complete, you don't want something, right? If you let's put it this way, if you're full, you're not going to eat more, right?
Yeah.
So you're just not going to want that thing. Um, and then really that I love that too. It's the incompleteness we harbor beneath the floor of surface consciousness, as long as we're not identified with ourselves. So being fully identified with that self reorients your desire. I was thinking, Augustine talks about um, ordered and disordered desires. Okay, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's where the whole ice cream thing came from. Now that I'm connecting the two, but I know in other passages he talks about ordered and disordered desires, and and you can think about all the disordered desires already.
Wait, is it kind of
Meaning in
like,
other words, like
I was gonna
it
say,
would
is
be
it kind
like
of like instrumental? But
well,
like, is an ordered
disordered
desire
would
an
be
instrumental desire or like an instrumental value
no. An
or
ordered desire is a proper desire with a proper desire with a proper fulfillment.
what does that
My stomach
mean?
is empty.
Oh,
My
okay.
stomach is empty. I eat food, right?
Okay, but you could
Um,
be eating ice cream,
true,
which
true,
would fill your
exactly.
stomach,
Yeah,
but would it fill what your body
that would,
needs?
yeah. If you were just eating ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, disordered,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or an ordered desire, Augustine would certainly see because he was big on sex, and I mean that in a number of ways. In his early age, he was certainly big on sex in one way, but he was disordered would be uh, d- sex with everyone anytime.
Mm-hmm.
Ordered in his case would ultimately be like married love,
Mm-hmm.
married sex. Um, so, but it's sort of, it was sort of the disordered in this case. So they don't use these terms. But the disordered in this case is it's almost sort of a lack of control. So a thought pops in my head, or an external event occurs, and then I run after it, right? Just like the chariot example in the
Yeah.
in one of the Upanishads. But the ordered one in this case would be um, I have I have so controlled. Whoops, sorry. The rain is making my screen look funny. Yeah, the I have so controlled um, my my senses, and I have realized that ultimate happiness is. Sorry. Oh gosh. Can you still see me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I realized that ultimate happiness is to connect myself with Brahman. So ordered desires would be disordered would fall away. Ordered desires would be then a proper orientation to why do I want X? Why you know
Mm-hmm.
um,
Well, so does
I
that mean
want
it's ordered to some sort of policy? Like you have to choose what is ordering.
yeah. Well, I think Augustine basic almost means ordered in the like disordered would be, if you will, flawed, or it's not
Like
it's
illogical?
it's yeah, illogical, or it's not even reaching its proper end. Order, yeah, I guess ordered, yeah, ordered would be. You're right, ordered in the sense of like it's ordered towards something.
Mm-hmm. Like,
Disordered, it's off. It's off target. You know.
mhm, like you have a goal in mind, and your goal is to eat healthily, or like to have a healthy
Yes.
body, right? So
Yes.
it's not a direct, it's instrumental. So to have a healthy body, and part of that is like, oh, I'm hungry, I need to fulfill this desire, so I feed
Correct.
myself vegetables and protein and stuff that's good for my body. That's
Right.
ordered because it aligns with my goal of a healthy body. But if I
Yes.
have ice
Yes. No.
cream,
Yes.
which
Yes.
fulfills
I
the
think.
desire for hunger, does not fulfill the higher order
Yes.
of my goal. Hmm.
Yes.
So you could do
No.
the
No.
same thing for like
Exactly.
self-realization as your goal.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that one just, and I like to sort of like thinking the logic out,
Hmm.
even a little bit below. The Upanishads go a step further. When we have the sensation, I want such and such, what we really mean is that we want the relative tranquility that follows when the desire subsides.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Skipping a line, this is from a particular sage. He says, "There, I love this. There is no happiness in any object of the world." And here's the source: the self is pure happiness, which we mistake as coming from outside. So the closer we come to the self within, the more we are aware of, the more we feel already, what we are looking for outside us. This is what the Upanishads mean by joy. Renunciation refers simply to dropping the outside reflection for the reality. Oh, that's good. Reflection,
Hmm.
reality, for the reality which is within. I mean, that section is powerful,
Yeah.
especially especially those two lines. There is no happiness in any object of the world, which, by the way, is true. And then
Yep.
it continues with the self is pure happiness, right? I mean, there's
Happiness
like,
is within the self, and this comes back to joy, right? Versus
yeah,
pleasure, because it's
yeah,
like looking for
yeah.
something without versus within.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Yeah, precisely. So it's an intriguing. It's so it's like one of those like seeming paradoxes of life. Of course the cotton candy brings me joy. Of course the alcohol brings me joy. Are you crazy? And then what's funny is that you then go to this element of like, no, guess what? It's not in that thing. It's true. No object actually contains it. It's ultimately a state of mind. And so you've got this thing that you think is bringing you joy. It's not. It's transitory. It's passing. It's not permanent. And and guess what? You're walking around like 24/7, 365 days. You're walking around with the source of joy inside, the source of real joy inside. You know, it's like times when we've talked about our meditating and um, saying Om. And in the moment and then after the moment, we both commented about how there is just this sort of general peace. The noise of the mind is slowed down and quieted, and and literally just sitting. You're just sitting, and you're uttering a sound.
Yep.
No money's being spent, nothing's being consumed. Um, and it's just. I mean, I actually do think that if you want to play it out, and this is really interesting because we didn't talk about uh, economics, but consumerism is addiction.
Hmm.
It's
All the
I need. I mean,
desires.
yeah, yeah. I mean, not all of it. You need to fix your house, right? And you might, but just all, you just go to the mall. The mall is basically based on an addiction. No one needs any of that.
Yep.
None of it really needs,
Yep.
you know. Maybe the food court, who knows? Um,
Well,
but so I think that's the crazy insight that I'm walking away having read the Upanishads, and what a treat to have done that, and a treat to have done that with you.
hmm,
Just like what, man, what is inside? why don't I investigate that? And and I am a man of tradition, and so if something's been around for a while, I think that says something about it. That's especially if you've got a element of sorry, practitioners before us,
Hmm.
these sages, who said this has been my experience. Why not give it a try? You know.
Yeah.
Concluding thoughts. I am getting wet,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to
Um,
change the scenery for the video.
okay, okay. Concluding thoughts. There's one thing I wanted to mention because I didn't
Go
know
for it.
they had a glossary of all the Sanskrit terms.
I know, I
I also
know.
didn't know that there were notes
I
on each of the chapters or Upanishads.
Oh, interesting,
And
interesting.
so I kind of just skimmed through those. I didn't read them all. But where's the word? Hold on. There's a word that we were talking about. This was before the notes. Glossary. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was cool to read some of these words and kind of actually see where they came from. Oh, but what was the
Yeah, and
one?
oh,
Yeah, I mean, like little things that like yajna means like sacrifice or worship, self-sacrificing
right.
action. So it's like Yajnavalkya was the guy who his fathers
Oh,
had him like
interesting.
sacrifice and go to the god of dead. So it's like little things like that.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. But
That's
what
really
was the
cool.
one? Um. Oh no, wait. Was it actually in the notes? Is what I was thinking. There were some interesting things there. Oh yeah, I think it was in the notes from one of the minor Upanishads
Uh-huh.
that we read last time, and we were. Oh, let's see. Where are you? There you are. Yes, the very last, the very last paragraph before the index. All right, 376. This
Okay.
is on the Paramhamsa
376. Okay.
Upanishad. Yeah. So there's just a little quote. We had
Okay.
talked about, right, so it quotes from that actual passage. He
Wh-
has no need to repeat the
which
mantra.
number is it? Oh, got it. Got it. The last one. Go
The
for it.
last thing, he has no need to repeat the mantra. We had talked about this. Like, what does it
Yes, I
mean? He
remember
has
that.
no need to repeat the
Yes.
mantra. Here's like an actual
Yeah.
explanation from the author who's
Uh,
doing this interpretation, right? That is, the mantra spontaneously and uninterruptedly repeats itself in his consciousness.
wow.
This is called
Wow.
ajapa japam. Likewise, the meditative state continues uninterrupted even when such a person performs actions in the changing world, the state called sahaja, or spontaneous self-generating. So it's
Hmm.
not that he's not doing it,
Interesting.
it's that it's in
Right.
him.
It's in him already.
Yeah.
It's just on.
Hmm.
It's absolutely on.
So I thought I wanted to bring that
That's
up because that was
beautiful.
kind of a question we had in the last one. But yeah,
Yeah.
the concluding thoughts. It was a really good read. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And the especially this last section, I feel like spurred a lot more thoughts on kind of like the content of the Upanishads. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
so
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know what's funny? And I almost felt like we should have read it before
I know, right?
because it referenced a number of the Upanishads. So for those viewers, read
Hmm.
the afterword first. It references some of these other or the Upanishads, and I was like, oh, it would have been a sort of like a nice little
Yeah.
um, getting like little insights before you do the reading,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then obviously, yeah, we probably should have been a little bit more thorough with the glossary because I'm actually I was looking at the glossary and I have a feeling that when we read the Rig Veda, a number of those terms are going to come up, but not all,
Sure.
because
Sure.
the Upanishads becomes much more mystical, or if not mystical, a movement away from the ritual sacrifices to ultimately individual self-realization.
Hmm.
So I imagine a lot of those terms will be more Upanishadic in nature, or Vedanta, the end of the Vedas.
Yep.
Which,
The
by the
end of
way,
the Vedas.
Vedanta, I was wondering, is that like literally like obviously obviously chronologically the Vedas end and the Upanishads start, but
Hmm.
also there was an element of like, is it the conclusion of
Right.
Vedic thought for
Like the New
the
Testament to the Old,
inauguration?
like
Yes,
replacing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Hmm. I don't know. Maybe kind of a little bit, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two other comments, and then we should wrap it up.
Yep.
Um, One, and I couldn't find it for some reason, but when he was, it must have been in the philosophy section when he does a thought experiment um, about life and
Mm-hmm.
how prana is the most basic feature of life. And so he starts to remove the senses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that section. He starts
Mm-hmm.
to remove the senses, and then sort of what's left
Mm-hmm.
is the breath, right? And when that makes sense to us, right? You're not breathing, you're dead. You're breathing, you're alive.
Yeah.
And so, but you can be blind in breathing. You can be deaf in breathing. I don't know, you know, whatever. If you, so you get difficulty smelling and feeling, but be
Mm-hmm.
breathing. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was interesting. I like this element of like slicing away things and then coming back to this basic prana,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe that goes to show the importance of the breath. And I know prana is other stuff, but the importance of the breath as a feature of our life, not just to keep us alive, but also on the way to self-realization. The
Mm-hmm.
other one, and this will connect. This is maybe a nice segue to the Rig Veda, which we'll start next time,
Mm-hmm.
is sacrifice. How sacrifice, it was brought up in the afterword, is sort of in the, and I've always thought about this about religions, especially old religions, archaic religions. There's always sacrifice, always something's dying,
Yeah.
or burnt, either to, I mean, this is true. Not, I mean, this is not just true in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, but also even in the Greeks. You know, uh, something has to die, you know, to
Yeah.
appease the gods. But I thought it was interesting because with the Upanishadic version, they symbol. It's more of a symbol, so not an actual ritual sacrifice, but they end up
Oh
taking
yeah.
the meaning of the Vedas and then seeing it more symbolically. However, sacrifice is wrapped up in renunciation. So it is, and I think that's even how he takes the notion of sacrifice by the sages of the Upanishads, where it's there. It's just not a ritual one with incense burning and some priest and an animal or whatever the type of offering is. But it's in you renouncing the world,
Mm-hmm.
essentially,
Yeah. Was it in the
which I thought
afterword
was
too?
interesting.
Yeah. Was it in the afterword too about the sages and the rituals, but just doing it in their mind? Like I feel like that feels kind of related,
Possibly,
where it was like
yeah,
there was a certain point where they had a sage, but they like I don't know, they had somebody like officiate these rituals from like
yeah,
the Vedas, and then they found
right.
that like one could just do it, oops, in their head,
Yeah.
like meditating, and it would
Interest,
had the same
possibly,
effect.
yeah.
I'm trying to
Oh,
remember where
yeah,
I
yeah,
read
yeah,
that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
But there is something in the afterword about sort of the power of the individual once they are self-realized.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like the power to sort of change the world in almost some sort of like what I took as mystical slash superhero way.
Sure.
Um, but uh, but yeah, the I mean, it's another topic, but I you know it would be interesting to include in some of our discussions the why of sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
its
Mm-hmm.
universality in the ancient world, like you know why are they doing it in the Indus Valley civilization, and then why are they doing it in ancient Israel, and again no communication between them.
Like
What
animal
is it about the
sacrifice,
human
like
mind?
or
Well, there are different kinds, but yeah, but
mhm,
yes, yeah, animal sacrifice or any type, because I think they'll even talk about
like
sort of like
food
a
and
burnt offering sacrifice or food. Yeah,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
well, I guess those are offerings, maybe, but yeah, animal sacrifice. Let's stick with
Mm-hmm.
that. What does it say about human nature that is in the warp and woof of us?
Mm-hmm.
That it comes out that something, I mean, obviously the Christian tradition is going to jump on that. It's because God had to die. That's why,
Right.
these are all pointing in that direction. But yeah, and it comes up in really interesting ways too. I mean, even in like Greek mythology, there's the one story about Odysseus with is it Polyphemus? He's in the cave of the giant,
Mm-hmm.
this monster. He's in the cave, and he's stuck in the cave because the giant wants to end up eating Odysseus and his friends. And then what's interesting is Odysseus, who's really smart and clever, comes up with this idea of each day, I think it's Polyphemus, let his sheep in and out of the cave. And so what happens is they end up clinging to the bottom of the sheep. And so as Polyphemus is petting them on the top, they're moving out. And I remember one commentator like actually talking about this as being sort of a form of sacrifice. It doesn't seem like it's a trick, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
just underneath, but the sheep or a lamb is like the iconic form of the sacrificial victim. Um,
Hmm.
so it just comes, it's why is it so prevalent? And I like the Upanishadic notion of, well, because you need to sacrifice self, or not the self, but ego,
Yeah.
let's say.
Yeah.
All right, we should stop.
Cool. All right.
Oh,
Om.
Om
Om.
Shanti
Shanti.
Shanti
Shanti.
Shanti.
Shanti.